So for non-deadly defensive force against another person, a person is justified in using or threatening to use force except deadly force. So this is the non-deadly force conditions. Against another person. When and to the extent that the defender reasonably believes such conduct is necessary to defend himself or herself or another against the other person's imminent use of unlawful force, and that defender does not have a duty to retreat. And then the deadly force paragraph, a person is justified in using or threatening to use deadly force if he reasonably believes that using such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself, or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. And they don't have a duty to retreat before they can do this. If they meet the conditions for stand your ground, which is being in a place they have a right to be, not being engaged in unlawful activity. So in a sense, you can't have been the aggressor. The other party has to have been the initial physical aggressor in the confrontation. Imminence, you're defending yourself against a threat from another person that's either actually occurring in the moment or immediately about to occur, not something in the past, not something speculatively in the future. Proportionality is reflected in the fact that there's two different paragraphs here. One for non-deadly force, except deadly force. The second for deadly defensive force. Avoidance, Florida addresses that by allowing for stand your ground. If you're in a place you have a right to be and you're not engaged in unlawful activity, you don't have a duty to retreat before you can use deadly force in defense of yourself, or any force in defense of yourself. And reasonableness. You have to have a genuine good faith belief in the need to use force in self-defense against that other person, and that belief has to be objectively reasonable. It can't be irrational or speculative or imaginative. These are the 5 elements that have to be met for the use of force against another person, another human being, to be justified. These are not the elements that need to be met before the use of force against an animal can be justified. There we look to a different legal defense. And typically it will be the defense of necessity. And I pulled up some representative examples of the necessity defense so we can see what that looks like, because it has different elements than use of force against another person. Here's an example out of Arizona. Conduct that would otherwise constitute an offense is justified, and therefore not a crime, not an offense, if a reasonable person was compelled to engage in the conduct and the person had no reasonable alternative to avoid imminent public or private injury greater than the injury that might reasonably result from that conduct, the normally prohibited conduct. An accused may not assert this defense if they intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly placed themselves in the situation in which it was probable they'd have to engage in the prohibited conduct. And you can't assert this necessity defense for offenses involving homicide or serious physical injury. So what are we really talking about here? These 3 elements. One is that you're engaged in some conduct that's normally criminal, normally unlawful, either criminal or privately sanctionable. So normally you're not supposed to do this, but you are engaged in that conduct to prevent some greater harm, That's the first element of a necessity defense. So you're walking down the street, you pass by a parked and locked car. It's a hot summer day. It's 100 degrees outside. And in this locked car with all the windows up, you see a baby has been left in the car seat in the back of the car. It will die in that car if it's not promptly secured from the vehicle. So you break the glass of the car so you can unlock the vehicle and save the baby from dying of heat within the car. Now, normally, is it unlawful to just break the window out of someone else's car? Yes, that would be an offense, a criminal offense. Criminal mischief, destruction of property, whatever the case might be. What you would argue is that, yes, that's normally unlawful, breaking out the glass of someone else's vehicle. But I did it. I committed that unlawful act to avoid some greater harm that would have resulted, the death of the baby. So the harm you cause is less than the harm that's avoided by your normally unlawful conduct. The second element is that you cannot have been the cause of the risk, of the danger that's you seek to avoid. So if you deliberately lock the baby in the car, someone else's car, I don't know, you grab someone's baby and you throw it in a strange unlocked car, and then you lock all the doors, and now you can still break the window to save the baby from the car, but because you created the danger to be avoided, you wouldn't be able to justify the breaking of the window under the necessity defense. You can't have created the harm you're now claiming to want to avoid and justify as necessity. And third, sometimes this is included explicitly in the statutes, but it always applies. You can't use the necessity defense to justify causing death or serious bodily injury to another person. That defense would have to be self-defense or defense of others or some other legal defense other than the necessity defense. So the harm you're seeking to avoid has to be greater than the harm you're causing. You can't have been the cause of the harm you're seeking to avoid. And you can't use it to justify causing death or serious bodily injury to another person. Classic elements of a necessity defense. Here's another one. This one is from Illinois. Conduct which would otherwise be an offense is justifiable by reason of necessity if the accused was without blame in occasioning or developing the situation, right? You didn't cause the problem, and reasonably believe such conduct was necessary to avoid a public or private injury greater than the injury which might reasonably result from his own conduct. Now, necessity defense doesn't normally apply if we're talking about a use of force against persons, because the states have established a different legal defense for that, the defense of self-defense or defense of others, which would be applicable if you used force against another person. But self-defense statutes say, like we just saw in Florida, you are privileged to use force against another person when these elements of self-defense are met. It's not applicable to the use of force against an animal. Now, in terms of our physical conduct, if we're being threatened by a dog or whatever kind of animal, of course, our physical conduct is conduct in self-defense. We're defending ourselves. Self-defense is a physical act, but it's also a term of art for a legal defense that you would raise as a justification to some criminal charge based on your use of force. So from the technical legal perspective, when you're claiming self-defense, it's for the use of a force against another person. When you're trying to justify your use of force against an animal, it would be the necessity defense. And of course, your use of force against another animal might be non-deadly force, might be deadly force. It's normally unlawful just to cause physical harm or kill another animal, right? That's generally a bad thing. So you'd have to be arguing, hey, the amount of force I used against that animal was less than the danger the animal was presenting, either to myself or to others, or maybe my own animal, right? That could apply too.